Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at the Rolex GMT-Master II, reference 16710. So as with all my reviews, let's go back in time now and take a look at the history of this watch. We're going to go back to around the 30s, 40s, even a little bit of the 50s as well. Air travel around this time was really becoming a much more feasible mode of transport. Aircraft were able to travel much longer, greater distances with more passengers and be able to go much further non-stop as well. So actually what was happening was aircraft were now transitioning through time zones. And as a result of this, the pilots that were flying these routes were constantly having to adjust their watches to keep up with the time zone that they were in. So in the 1950s, Pan Am, the American airline, contacted Rolex and asked them to create a watch for their pilots that would allow their pilots to quickly and easily adjust the time zone on their watch. Not only that, but also be able to see the time in their place of origin, so their home time, and also the place in their destination as well. So basically display two time zones simultaneously. So Rolex set out to create a special watch with a special movement for these pilots. So in 1954, Rolex released the GMT-Master, which was just 1 year after they released the Submariner in 1953. The GMT-Master featured the same case, the same bracelet, pretty much the same overall watch that the Submariner was. They just put a new bezel on and changed the movement and also changed the dial. So almost identical piece. But the things they added to the GMT-Master was a rotating bezel that, unlike the Submariner, could rotate in both directions, which allowed quick adjustment. Basically, the bezel featured a 24-hour scale, which allowed the pilot to use the 24-hour hand that was on the dial and be able to measure the time off the bezel. The watch actually could technically feature 3 time zones simultaneously, or you could look at 3 time zones simultaneously. But really, the advertised number of time zones was 2 on this watch, which was exactly what Pan Am had asked for their pilots anyway. It was a great success when it was released. Obviously, it was around the time of the Submariner anyway, so there was great hype around Rolex as a result of both of these watches, in fact. So Pan Am used these watches and the pilots used these watches, but over the years, many more people used them. They kind of had a bit more of a dressy, more luxurious feel than the Submariner did. Obviously, the Submariner was designed to be, a dive watch and worn underwater in a more harsh environment. A few different variations of this watch were released over the years, but the one we're interested in was released in 1989, and that was the reference 16710 that we're looking at today. That was in production until 2007, when it was replaced by the 116710, or series of references. That was when they updated the watch to feature the super case. The one we're looking at today is dated in 2004, so it's kind of towards the end of that production period of that 16710, but it actually has a couple features that are actually more relevant to the earlier examples of this reference. So let's move on to the features now. So we'll start with the clasp. The clasp on this watch is the older style Rolex Oyster Clasp. It features pretty much no adjustment or easy adjustment. The only way to adjust this and make it slightly larger or smaller is to remove the pins within inside the bracelet where it connects actually to the clasp itself. So it's quite a cumbersome, it's not an easy way to adjust the clasp or the bracelet. Definitely not as easy as the modern day clasps with the glide lock system or the Easy Link system on the GMT Masters, but still a good clasp. If you just kind of this checkerboard effect, it's very, very large as well, compared to the newer or slightly newer versions, like a year or two after this one. They featured a much smaller clasp that was much better, actually more similar to the clasps they feature now on the modern day GMT Masters. But still good clasp, relatively solid. It's kind of hollow though, that's the only thing I'd say, and can sometimes get dented because it is hollowed out versus the modern day clasps, which are a little bit more solid, a bit more compact. It's not my favorite clasp, but it's still pretty good. Next, moving on to our bracelet, we've got a standard Oyster bracelet. This one is in all brushed finish as opposed to the modern day GMT Master, sorry, that featured a polished center link on those bracelets. Standard classic bracelet from Rolex. You can't really go wrong with this bracelet. It's a fantastic bracelet, very, very solid. It can stand the test of time easily. They're probably one of the best bracelets for everyday wear in the whole entire industry. Moving now on to our case, we've got a steel case in the kind of slightly smaller case size than than we have now with our super cases. Our super cases feature slightly larger lugs, more chunky style case with a much chunkier bezel. Overall, just a more chunky watch in general. It's still the same 40mm case size, but it definitely wears at least a millimeter or two larger than the older style. I personally absolutely love this slightly smaller case and slightly more elegant case that we have on the older versions like this one. The case on this watch features like a brushed finish on top and then like a polished finish on the sides of the case. It's definitely more elegant than the modern day ones. This one features slightly more rounded edges, not only just because this one is older and has been worn a little bit and polished, but the edges on the cases were nowhere near as sharp as they make them now. Moving now onto our bezel, we've got an aluminium bezel on this watch as opposed to the ceramic bezel or Cerachrome bezel that Rolex now puts on their watches. The advantage to the ceramic is it's very hard to scratch. It also doesn't tend to fade with time in terms of the colors. So it is a much better option overall, but these aluminium bezels are definitely better than the original Bakelite bezels they used to put on these watches. Moving now onto our dial, we've got an almost identical dial to the modern day watches. The only real difference is the fact that we don't have that kind of maxi style markers that we have on the modern day watches. These indexes on this watch are slightly smaller, but other than that, it's pretty much identical in terms of dial to the modern day pieces. Movement is obviously updated on the modern watches, but it's a great watch, you know, a great movement nonetheless, and definitely, like I said, will withstand the test of time. It's just modern day movements are a little bit more accurate and more reliable than the older versions. Okay, so on to whether or not I would own this piece. I would definitely own this watch. The only thing I don't love about this piece is the tone of the bezel on this watch. I don't love those colors on this piece. I much prefer a more understated color. I find these two quite bright colors. I think the modern day Pepsis feature much more understated, toned down version of these colors, which looks better in my opinion. However, I do love the vintage watches that feature like a faded bezel. The patinaed bezels are absolutely beautiful. I do still love this Pepsi bezel. It's just not my favorite. It's my only thing I don't absolutely love about this watch. I think this piece is so brilliant, though I do personally prefer this to the modern day variations. The reason being, I love the smaller case. I find that vintage Rolexes have more character anyway than the modern ones. I'm sure it's the same with like a vintage Mercedes or a vintage BMW versus a modern day BMW or Mercedes. Modern day Rolexes definitely feel like they come off a production line. There's not that much character to them. They definitely feel like a machine, whereas these older variations, now they've had a few years wear and tear, and also the production was slightly different back then for Rolex. These definitely feel like they have a bit more life and character than the modern day variations. For that reason, I would choose this older one over a new one, but I love both. This one's just my favorite, my preference. The ghosting dials are actually really, really cool. If you get a chance to check those out, I'll put one on the screen now as well for you to see. But the ghosted ghosted bezel Pepsis are really, really cool. Even just the other GMT Masters as well, but specifically the Pepsi with the ghosted bezel is really cool. I love the way that those bezels patinaed over time. So if this one had that, then I think it'd be pretty much perfect. But I just love the way this watch wears on my wrist. It definitely wears smaller than the new ones. And for that reason, I absolutely love this piece. Thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think of this GMT-Master II from Rolex. It's a fantastic piece. We're definitely finding the vintage GMT Masters much more popular now than we used to. People still absolutely loving the GMT Master though. The release of the Batman and the Pepsi definitely has helped that massively. And as always, if you're interested in this watch or any other watch in the Rolex collection, then don't hesitate to contact us. Our details are in the description. And also at the end of the video, it'd be a pleasure to call any of those watches into stock for you. And in fact, this model is available from us today, this example, in stock with us available today as well.